morning, everybody. Happy hump day. Welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's political editor, John Stevens. Morning, John.
Hey, morning, Susie.
Now, this is the People's Paper Review, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. Those of you listening later on podcast, just going to have to keep saying you're doing something that you're not doing and see if anyone actually believes you. So what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on TV presenter Ant McPartlin becoming a father. Although why it's not the woman who put the effort in getting attention, I don't really know. But a couple of things inside with perhaps a bit more impact on our daily lives. First, on page 12, is about pharmacies closing down. Now, John, it says right at the end of this piece that the government has given pharmacies £645 million to make them the first port of call for patients who can't get a GP appointment. So how is it therefore possible they're closing down?
I don't know if you've been to a pharmacy recently, but I used to use the pharmacy. There was one in the supermarket nearby, and then that got shut down. So then there's a little chemist just at the end of my road, which I probably should have been using all along.
The independent one, yes.
Exactly. Who's this lovely guy who is absolutely great, but you can't go in there without... You can't go in there quickly. It always takes quite a bit of time to get your prescription because you get a lot of chat as well, which is maybe great for some people. It's quite nice. Community feel, is it? If I'm in a rush, less so keen on the chat. But every time I go in there, the pharmacist is saying, we're just making a loss on prescriptions, that every time we get a prescription coming in that we're making a loss on them. And you look at the figures on the number of pharmacies that have closed in the last few years. I think the figure for last year was 403 pharmacies closed, which compares to just 91 in 2022, which is only a few years ago. And clearly there is a problem here in funding. And obviously there is an impact at a time when the government does want pharmacies to be doing more and more. We've heard from them in the last few months that they were one of their big ideas to stop the strain on GPs and tackle the problem of people not being able to get GP appointment was to say to some people, when you're dealing with some conditions, you can just go to your pharmacist instead and they'll be able to prescribe you exactly the same thing you'd have got if you went to the doctor. So I think there's 7 conditions, things like impetigo, shingles, a sore throat, can't quite remember all of them. So the whole idea was that pharmacies were meant to be taking some of the strain off our GPs who are clearly got way too many patients that they are able to see. But if pharmacies are shutting down full stop, then that's just not going to work. And so I think the government's currently in talks with pharmacists about what sort of long-term arrangement could we come to. Does there need to be some changing in the contract and how much the NHS is paying to pharmacists? Because clearly, if you've got all these people on street corners who are able to help people out when they've got illnesses that are relatively minor, then that would be really handy. But if everywhere's just shutting up shop and just saying it's not worth us staying in business, then that's clearly a problem. And once you lose something like a pharmacist on your local street, it's highly unlikely you're ever going to get them back again.
Yeah. Now, what do you think, everybody? Have you had a pharmacist close down in your area? I've got one in the village. It seems to be going okay. But I do know the same thing as you, John. They tend to be very chatty, although I'm not quite like you. Go, I don't want to talk to you and run away. But the issue is, I think, that the cost of medicines is that the pharmacists have to buy in are increasing, and the funding for that has not matched it. And so what's happened here really is the government has given pharmacists more work and not enough money to pay for it, and it's a private business. They've also removed the bursaries for training and degrees to help pharmacists who you've trained for like 7 years to start in the first place. So surprise, surprise, in a capitalist system, it's not really worth carrying on. When you have a private business, it's not working out. This, everyone, is what will happen if the NHS is gone. There will come a point where hospitals in poorer, sicker areas find that costs are too high and they lose too much money to be sustainable. So they just go somewhere else. But what can really be done, though, John? Pharmacists have been saying for years that they're in trouble. This has been going on for a long time. The government's repeatedly said we're giving them more money that never seems to quite either turn up or do the job. The funding gap is apparently about £67,000 per pharmacy. We all know the government aren't going to do anything about this, but, have Labour got a plan to deal with this problem?
I don't know specifically what Labour's plan on pharmacies is, but if they haven't got one, and they might have one, I'm just not aware of it. But if they don't, would seem quite sensible that this is exactly the sort of thing that Labour think is important, not just from a practical terms of just saying we need to bring down waiting lists, but Labour does place an importance on community. We saw that last year with the whole debate about whether the railway ticket offices should shut down. And there was a whole argument there that it wasn't just about the practicalities. It was this whole idea that our communities are being hollowed out. And if you just have places that just all the places where you might possibly run into people, where there might be staff, where there might be that feel of community, if all of those sort of places just shut down, then you don't just lose the ability to buy railway tickets or get your prescription locally. You kind of just lose the whole kind of sense of being in a place. And it's not something very tangible. It's something, it's much more of a concept. But I think that loads of people value that sort of thing. And I think it's only when you lose it and we just become places where people live, there are kind of faceless shops, which are exactly the same everywhere you go. You know, you've got your local supermarket, but that's it. And people don't really know each other. Once that's gone, then I think that would be really sad and people would miss it.
Yeah, don't go to your supermarket pharmacy, everybody. Try and go to another one, an independent one, if you've got one knocking around. While you were speaking, John, I had a quick Google. Labour, yeah, I can do that too. Multitasking. The Labour conference last year, Labour set out a vision for what they were going to do with pharmacies, and it is worryingly full of just words and not much detail. Talking about greater digital interoperability with GPs, so just giving them a computer link to GPs, which your pharmacy generally already has, and more roles for the pharmacists, stepping up to do more prescribing for things, same kind of stuff that the Tory government has already said it's wanted to do, cut unnecessary red tape, and also to have them involved in clinical trials in the community, which I suppose would mean that some kind of funding for them and an alternative stream. But in brief, not much detail. And much of the same kind of thing. Something clearly needs to be done. What do you think, everybody? Have you had problems with a community pharmacist? Have you lost one? Do you need one? Do you find them incredibly useful part of the community, as John was just saying there? Surely what needs to be done, John, is that, you know, get some of these bursaries back to fund the degree courses, stop making pharmacists do the jobs of GPs, make sure you've got enough GPs to do their job in the first place, get things back to where they were. But that would, you know, all that is kind of a bit cloud cuckoo land, and it would take a decade, wouldn't it? It would take billions. Is there any way to fix this, even if Labour wanted to?
We do know that pharmacists are capable of, when we do use them, it can be quite helpful. So remember in the pandemic, at the start, we had those big vaccine centres and lots of people got their COVID vaccine at one of those big vaccination centres, or different GP surgeries gang together to do them, and you'd go through and it was quite efficient. And then in later kind of rounds, more recently, when it's been people with specific health conditions or older people who've been able to get their jab, then they've been able to go to the local pharmacy to get it. And they've been quite helpful at rolling out those things, as well as getting things like flu jabs out to people. So we know that they are a handy resource of people. So yeah, I think it's they've got great potential to be able to help out with the health problems that we've got as a country, but they just need to be properly used.
It's just the funding, isn't it? It's just to actually get it in place. I think perhaps for the cost of medicines to come down a bit, so that the funding they have already covers that. Because all that happens when the government says we increase funding for pharmacies is it goes straight to the pharmaceutical companies. It just goes via the pharmacies. It doesn't go in anyone's pocket. It doesn't help them keep going. If they just put the price up, then that's that, isn't it? Right. Thank you for that, John. Now, we need to go on to the main story of the day. And the Home Office Minister, Chris Philp, has been all over the airwaves this morning talking about the Criminal Justice Bill, which is having a vote in Parliament. Now, the Tories have been saying for a while now they want to ban so-called ninja knives. Here we are with a story about the families of those who've been killed by knife attacks, demanding the government vote for a ban. Almost, John, as though that's not what's happening. So what exactly is going on? The government wants to sound tough on this, but here there are families saying you're not tough enough.
Yeah, we've had loads of announcements over the last few years. think when we counted it up, it's not that long ago that we counted up how many different Tory Home Secretaries had promised to get rid of zombie knives and how it hadn't actually happened. But the government have finally brought in rules which are kind of outlawing different types of weapons, but each time there's complaints from campaigners that there are still loopholes that mean that certain types of knives aren't covered. So at some point they kind of ban things if they had writing on the knife that said kind of violent, with kind of like threatening language on there. Then there was all the different rules about how big the blade was it a serrated knife? So each time they come up with rules, there still seems to be some loopholes in there, which means that people are still getting killed with dangerous weapons on the street. And the example that we're talking about here is ninja swords, which is slightly different from a zombie knife, and it's slightly different from a samurai sword. I think it's like more of a straighter blade, and it's a weapon that was traditionally used by ninjas, but obviously it's now being not used by ninjas. It's been used by hoodlums and violent people on the streets of Britain, which is not what we want at all. No. And the awful thing is there are loads of awful stories about people who have lost the lives of their children because of this. And in the paper today, we've got some quotes from Pooja Kanda, whose son, Ronan Kanda, there she is on the screen. There's a picture of Ronan. He was a 16-year-old who was in Wolverhampton, and he'd been playing at one of his friend's house after school. He was walking home, and then he was killed with one of these ninja swords by two kids. I think they were also age 16. It was a case of mistaken identity. He was killed. I think it was a 20-inch blade, so like an absolutely awful weapon. I think one of the kids had managed to order online and pick up from a post office using his mum's ID. He didn't obviously have the right ID to get the knife himself or the blade himself. And so what Labour are doing today is there is a bit of legislation that's going through the House of Commons later. They want to put an amendment on it which would explicitly ban ninja swords as well. And there's some quite emotive quotes from Pooja Kanda in the paper today. I think she talks about how she just wants the MPs to listen to the cries of grieving parents, is what she's saying, and just saying that finally they need to do all they can to make sure that no one else can be killed by these weapons. And these stories do keep coming up. It's only a few weeks ago that we had that awful story of Daniel Andrin, who was the 14-year-old who was killed with a sword in Hainault. And I don't think the police have actually said exactly what type of sword that was, whether it was a ninja sword or whether it was a slightly different one. But with this problem keep coming up or happening over and over again with all these awful stories, you would think the government would be keen to do all they could to show they were taking this seriously. But so far, it seems like there are still these loopholes in the legislation, which means people are able to get their hands on these weapons.
Yeah, it's astonishing, isn't it? So we've had, I mean, just in the last couple of weeks, I think we've had convictions, haven't we, for the lad who knifed, mentally ill lad who knifed Poppy Seller in West London. And then there was the two students in Nottingham who were killed by Valdo Calocane, apparently in the grip of a psychotic episode. And every single time we've had those, there's been Home Secretaries who've written a piece for one of the right-wing papers saying, we're going to ban this kind of knife, it's outrageous. As you know, the knife is obviously part of it, but obviously all these things has a whole bunch of other stuff that causes the clash as well. But, you know, I bought a knife on Amazon the other day, John, and it was just a camping tool, right? It's one of those things that you unfold. It's got a bit of a blade, it's got a screwdriver, it's got a bottle opener, it's got all the important, basically it's a glorified Swiss Army knife. But I think the blade that was in it was about 3 inches long. And when I bought it on Amazon, I had to put in my date of birth, right? Scroll back to the last century. And I was told that when it's delivered to you, you'll need to present photo ID to prove that it's you and that you want the knife. And I thought, well, that's not very tough. I could still, you know, be using it for nefarious reasons. But then when the Amazon delivery driver turned up with it, he just asked me to confirm the name on the package and then tossed it at me. He didn't care about ID at all. So it was even less good than the really limp restrictions that are already in place. And here we are, we've got families of those who've been killed by knife attacks demanding, that something be done. We've had 244 people killed with a knife in England and Wales last year. So it just doesn't seem like the rules are working particularly. Why doesn't the government just tighten this up? I mean, it's in their political best interests. You could, as a Tory government right now, with the knife crime that we've got, just bring in something incredibly draconian and you'd get some votes for it. Why not just ban the sale of these things? That there's no excuse for. There's an excuse for a camping tool that happens to have a blade in it. There's something that's 20 inches long, 2 foot of steel. There's no excuse for that. No one needs it in your daily life. Why is it for sale in the first place? Why don't they do something about this?
Yeah, I mean, the government has been keen to look like they are taking some action on this issue. I mean, you talked about how Chris Philp, the Home Office Minister's on the radio and TV this morning. They're talking about how the government's putting in several £1 million into research. They're looking at whether you could set up, give police these body-worn cameras that can somehow automatically detect whether someone has got a concealed weapon on them. So they are looking at different things you could do in technology. They are looking at how you could spend money to tackle this problem of the increase of knife crime on our streets. But it seems like, part of the problem with the legislation is remember when they were when the government was trying to ban spice and all those different substances, and every time they would work out in law how you would ban something, then the dealers would just find some way of changing the recipe, which they would no longer be covered by the law. And so you can understand some of this is understandable, that if you have got the knives that are being bought, they're finding ways to get loopholes, finding ways to get around them. It is the job of the government to shut these down, and it is the job of the government to make sure that there is a comprehensive ban in place, which means that we just stop talking about this over and over again with talking about pressure on the government to ban things like zombie knives or ninja swords or whatever comes next. It is the job of the Home Office and government ministers to make sure that our laws are up to date, so they are covering the weapons that are managing to get into people's hands.
Yeah, it does seem a bit strange, really, that something more than this can't be done, because I can understand that something like spice and like drugs, you can slightly change the chemical formula of something and find a way around it. But when you could just ban 2 foot swords, right? Unless you are a sword dealer, an antique sword dealer, you're trading an armory or something, there's no excuse for it. You need a license to trade something like that or to buy something like that. Mike says, I thought carrying a knife came with a 5-year sentence already. But that doesn't seem to be stopping, setting the sentences and so on. And there are an awful lot of kids, 16-year-olds that we've just heard about, who feel it necessary to go out with a knife for their own protection. And then, of course, everyone's got one. And then, of course, something goes horribly wrong. Chris Hallam says most of those, the deaths that kill people, most of them are kitchen knives. Legislation would do little. I mean, yeah, some of the I've got a carving knife that's a foot long. That just came in a knife block that probably most people have got. And an awful lot of homicides probably happen at home in the kitchen, let's face it. Someone doesn't like their sprouts. But there's got to be something more done than we are doing, one would think. Leslie says, who's manufacturing these weapons? Why are they being allowed to sell them in the first place? Why can't we just stop them being created? You could ban the creation of those knives, ban the import of those knives, and then you don't need to ban the sale or have age restriction checks or anything else. If they're not allowed in the country, that would be a way around it, wouldn't it, surely? Has Labour got any big ideas about this? And they're going to have this vote today in the Commons, aren't they, that you said? So I think Labour's tabled an amendment, haven't they, to this that would bring in a ban. Is it going... How come Labour have done it and the Tories won't?
So Labour have done it because this is something that Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, has been pretty hot on. She's been very keen to show that they're taking this seriously. And aside from this, Labour have been pushing this idea that you need to do things to tackle the problem of people getting weapons online. So you do need to look at whether online platforms such as Amazon do have many more requirements on doing proper age verification. Doing age verification to make sure that these knives aren't getting to people. And obviously, like the people in the comments are saying there, you are never going to be able to totally solve this problem. We're always going to have some sort of knife crime on our streets, that is partly because obviously people do still need to have kitchen knives in their home. You're never going to be able to properly eradicate this. But I think that doesn't mean that we can't do some steps to limit the problem. So doing things that making sure that children can't get hold of these weapons with absolutely ginormous blades. And yeah, people might be able to get a kitchen knife up the block, but you look at some of the swords and some of the weapons that people are able to get hold of, and they are a lot more dangerous than just having a knife out of a block in the kitchen. And so there are practical things you can do on that, and also making sure that we've got enough police on the streets, that people don't feel that they can carry these weapons with impunity, that people think that, well, if I do that, there is a likelihood that there might be a policeman or a police car somewhere that might stop you.
Exactly. And we're criminalising all these kids as well. They've got other problems, some of them. And I do tend to think that, a kitchen knife has got a possible dual purpose, right? And if you wanted to, you can kill someone with a knitting needle anyway. Never mind, you can use a tiny little vegetable knife. But there is no possible dual purpose to a 2-foot sword. It's not like you're in your day job, you are an actual ninja. You're not. Mike says, also to be factored in is the very lengthy delay in cases getting to court. The fact that even serious offenders are being let out of jail early because they're full. The whole criminal and legal system needs upgrading. I'd add to that, Mike, huge problems with mental health treatment and care in this country. People are able to slip through the net very often, as Valdo Calocane did before he launched his attacks in Nottingham. So there's a huge issue. It's just there's a huge number of factors in it, but you could just take the knives away. We did after Dunblane. We took the guns away, and that worked pretty well. I think we've had a couple of shoot-ups since then, but it's been nowhere near as bad. And we could easily do something about swords and machetes, you'd have thought. We don't need those generally. JC says, oh my God, you can use your hand to chop fruit. You won't. No knives will be banned. Okay. Right. We need to... There's this vote in the Commons today. So Labour are going to have tabled an amendment which will be about this ban. Is this just playing politics, though, John? Because surely the government are going to vote against it, and then all that's going to happen is Labour are going to say it's an electioneering thing, isn't it? When it comes to the election, they're going to put out a leaflet saying your Tory MP voted against a knife ban. Is it really going to achieve anything? Is there a series of amendments, perhaps, where a Tory ban might actually get through?
I don't actually know how the Tories are planning to vote this afternoon. I'm not quite sure what whipping arrangements they've got. I mean, it is possible that they decide that this is a sensible idea, that this is something that they can support. Obviously, it is the job of MPs when you do have bits of legislation going through the House of Commons that, yeah, often you do see the ways MP vote being turned into kind of these infographics that MPs are tweeting saying your local MP didn't do this, or I voted this while the Tories didn't do that, But it is the job of MPs to shape legislation and improve it and spot things in there, spot opportunities. But this bill, I think it's the criminal justice bill that's going through the House of Commons. It is something where there are so many different amendments on so many different issues. This isn't just about knife crime. There are loads of different issues that MPs are debating on this, but the specific debate about whether ninja swords get banned if there is some tightening up of the legislation, it's not yet known whether the Tories are going to support that or suggest that that's not something that's necessary. No,
but it is ripe territory for an opposition to make a fuss about. So that's what's happening today, probably. Let's hope something actually does get sorted out beyond all this. So, I mean, we've got pharmacists who are being told they've got more funding, but yet they don't have enough money and they're closing down. We've got knife crimes, and Home Secretaries keep saying that are dreadful, but they will lead to a ban on these weapons that they haven't actually banned so far. And it's like being in an abusive relationship, with a partner who keeps saying, I love you, but then you're repeatedly punched in the face. There's one thing that they keep saying, and the opposite keeps happening. It's just not true, some of this stuff that they've been feeding us. I mean, you've been in Westminster for a long time, and I know that there'll be viewers who cynically go, well, politicians always lie, blah, blah. But in my experience, which is not as extensive as yours, but, there's always politics, there's always spin, there's always a different way of looking at something that they might try and turn to their advantage. But an outright flat lie, we're helping pharmacies, no, we're not. We're building new hospitals, no, we're not. We're banning knives, no, we're not. That is, how How are those ministers going out on the airwaves and selling this and telling a flat lie to the public? Do they know they're lying? Or are they...
Well, I think that one of the things that's been highlighted over the last few days is how that rather than tackling these big issues that are impacting people in the real world, so whether that's dealing with the cost of living or dealing with problems with crime and the increases in knife crime, that the government's spending way too much time talking about much more frivolous issues. So we had Esther McVey, who's meant to be the Minister for Common Sense. That is literally the job title that Number 10 itself is now using to describe her. I gave a speech earlier this week where she was talking about how she didn't want civil servants to be wearing rainbow lanyards anymore, which would fine. That may be your opinion, and that might be something to argue if the government had sorted out all the other problems the country was facing right now. But it's probably for most people, not really something that impacts their life. If you're living in many parts of the country, living in Cornwall, where I grew up, or anywhere else, you don't really care whether officials in Whitehall are wearing a rainbow lanyard or not. You would think there'd be more pressing issues for the government to get on with dealing, but apparently not. That seems to be something that's at the top of the agenda. And it came just after Rishi Sunak gave that speech. What day are we on now? Is it Wednesday? On Monday, he gave that speech suggesting that we're at the most dangerous point the country's facing ever. We're on the verge of World War III. He didn't quite say that, but I think he said that we're in the most dangerous point that we've been possibly since the Cuban Missile Crisis. The idea that at the same time that he was giving that speech, or just shortly before it, that Esther McVey was giving this speech, which ostensibly seemed to all be about dealing with the wokerati at the heart of government, those things don't quite match up. And I think people think, well, if we're on the verge of World War III, possibly more important things to be doing than dealing with rainbow lanyards.
Yeah, I mean, also, how much a new lanyard's going to cost? Could they not spend that on the pharmacists or something? Because, there's an awful lot of rainbow lanyards last time I looked.
Not sure that's going to fund the problem. I'm not sure that's
help. World War III, I know, new lanyards. Try telling that one to Zelensky. I don't think it's going to sell quite so much. Bradley on Twitter says, it doesn't matter what kind of knife it is. A knife is a knife. Worst of all, every household has at least one knife that could easily kill someone. I hope I'm proved wrong for the sake of the kids losing their lives on a weekly basis, but knife crime will never go away, as we were saying. But you can make sword crime go away. I think sword crime we can probably do something about, Bradley. Right, thank you for that, John. Now, we have managed to find some good news for you in the world, and here it is. Now, there's nothing like a dog story to warm the cockles, is there? And here we have the tale of Pluto, who was born as a stray in a Romanian kill shelter, who was due to be put down at just 4 days old after his mum and his siblings were rehomed, but he was left behind. Now, he remarkably did get rescued by another charity, and he lived for 11 years in a shelter in Bucharest without being rescued himself. And when the Mirror featured his story a while ago, there were 2 kids called Noah and Esme who begged their granddad, Barry Lane, from Tyne and Wear to adopt him. And it's happened now. Pluto, as you can see from those pictures, is happily settled into a new life in Whitburn and enjoying every minute of it. Oh, they're probably hopefully having a bit of a nap. Now he's 11. John, is this proof that if you're in a terrible, terrible situation, no pharmacy, no GP, knife crime, about to be put down, whatever, it is always possible to get out so long as there's people who care enough to actually fix it?
I mean, it gives us all hope. This poor dog, Pluto, had never set foot outside of this dog shelter in Bucharest. I think it's called the Nobody Dogs dog shelter, which I don't know if that sounds quite miserable. But anyway, this poor dog, Pluto, never set foot out of the shelter. But now he's travelled across Europe to come to Tyne and Wear, as you say, is living this new life, and will hopefully, the last few years of his life will be hopefully a lot more present than the early years, which sound rather lonely in that dog shelter in Bucharest.
Yeah, and there's lovely pictures of him having a nice walk in the spring grass, lying on his master's bed, generally living the life of Riley. Well deserved, I think, Pluto. And if only there were a couple of dog charities that could rescue Britain, then maybe we'd all be able to be a little bit better off. Thank you for that, John. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. If you're listening on podcast, please leave us a review. If you want to come back and see Prime Minister's questions, they'll be on these channels at 12 o'clock today. I think Parliament's been recess next week or the week after as well. They've got something called Whitsun, something they used to have at Eton, so they have it in Parliament as well. And that we'll be back with a bit more political news after that. But come and see Prime Minister's Questions at 12 before they all knock off for a long holiday. And we will see you all again on Monday for another edition of the News Agenda. Till then, everybody, stay safe. Tatty bye.